No one expected a billionaire to beg for help at 38,000 feet, but that was exactly what happened on Flight AA-392 when Ethan Caldwell's 10-month-old son began screaming so hard it felt like the walls of the first-class cabin were vibrating, his tiny cries cutting through the quiet darkness of a red-eye flight like glass shattering on marble. And the man known for conquering boardrooms with a single sentence suddenly looked powerless, broken, and lost. If you're watching this now, take a moment to hit like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from, because this is one of those stories you'll never forget. It was 1 o'clock in the morning somewhere over Idaho, and the hum of the engines was drowned out by the piercing wail of baby Noah Caldwell, his face red and tear-streaked, his little fists balled up tight as he fought against the swaddle in his father's trembling hands, and around them, in the polished beige leather seats of American Airlines first-class cabin, the reactions were swift and unforgiving. A man in a tailored gray suit muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I paid $2,000 for this seat, not a ticket to a nursery," while a woman in Gucci sunglasses pressed her noise-canceling headphones tighter against her ears and shook her head with visible disgust. Ethan's jaw tightened, his $3,000 Navy Armani suit clinging to his back with sweat, his polished composure unraveling with each second, and yet he refused to look away from his son, rocking him gently, whispering words that had no effect at all. The billionaire who built a $12 billion AI empire could command hundreds of engineers, move global markets, and reshape industries, but here, 38,000 feet above the earth, he couldn't silence one 10-month-old child, and for the first time in years, he felt truly small. His carefully curated image, the single father balancing empire and parenthood, was collapsing before his eyes, and he knew the passengers were filming. He could feel the weight of their stares, their whispered complaints, and the glow of phones angled discreetly from across the aisle. Ethan had tried everything: an imported $200 pacifier made of hypoallergenic silicone, a white noise app his assistant had sworn by, even a miniature air humidifier tucked discreetly beside the seat, but Noah screamed louder with every attempt, his distress unrelenting, relentless, impossible to soothe. In the cramped galley behind the curtain, Maya Jackson leaned against the counter, her back aching from a 12-hour diner shift before this flight, the faint smell of burnt coffee clinging to her uniform as she listened to the cries she could feel deep in her chest. Her instincts told her the baby was overwhelmed, overstimulated, spiraling, but her supervisor's voice cut through her thoughts like ice. "Stay in economy, Maya," Vanessa Reed snapped, clipboard pressed tightly to her chest like a shield. "First class is for senior crew, not temporary stand-ins." Maya bit her lip and nodded, but her mind drifted back to Englewood, back to a childhood spent calming her little sister Aaliyah during midnight asthma attacks, back to her mother's soft voice in the dark, "Calm comes from your heart, not your hands." She wanted to help, but rules were rules, and on this plane, Vanessa was queen. Meanwhile, first-class tensions were boiling over. A bald man with a gold watch slammed his call button. "Is no one going to do something?" he barked at the passing crew. "This is unacceptable." Vanessa swept into the cabin like a storm, heels clicking, blonde bun perfectly sculpted, her professional smile tighter than the seatbelt sign glowing above her. She crouched beside Ethan's seat, her voice syrupy but sharp underneath. "Sir, perhaps you should take him back to the galley," she suggested, glancing pointedly toward the economy curtain, her tone polite enough to disguise the sting. Ethan's head jerked up, blue eyes cold and defensive. "I paid for this seat," he said evenly, his voice low but firm. "We'll stay here." Vanessa's smile faltered before she straightened, retreating down the aisle with controlled irritation, whispering something sharp to another attendant who smirked behind her hand. Maya watched from the galley, stomach tight, torn between following orders and following her heart. She knew that sound, that raw, desperate cry. Noah wasn't just fussy, he was spiraling into sensory overload, and if someone didn't intervene soon, it could get worse. She remembered rocking Aaliyah on nights when the wheeze wouldn't stop, holding her close, sinking their breaths until calm spread like ripples through their bodies, and before she knew it, her feet were moving. She stepped out from behind the curtain, walking into the glare of first-class judgment, the whispers rising instantly. "Who let her up here?" a woman hissed to her husband. Isn't she one of the temps? Vanessa's head snapped around like a whip, her eyes narrowing into daggers. Maya, she hissed, voice low and venomous, back to economy, now. But Ethan looked up, hair damp from stress, his shoulders sagging under exhaustion, and in that moment, their eyes met. Maya didn't flinch. I can help, she said softly, steady and certain. Vanessa inhaled sharply, ready to unleash a lecture about protocol, but Ethan's voice cut through her like a blade. Then help, he said, almost pleading, his pride stripped away by fatigue and frustration. Vanessa froze, lips tightening, clipboard clutched like a weapon she couldn't wield, and she stepped aside reluctantly as Maya knelt in front of Ethan, extending her arms. May I? She asked gently, and he nodded without hesitation. Noah came into her hands like a trembling bird, his body stiff and shuddering, his tiny chest heaving with uneven breaths, and Maya held him close, one palm against his back, the other supporting his head. She closed her eyes and began to hum, a soft, low gospel tune her mother used to sing on hard nights, a melody that seemed to carry safety inside its notes. Slowly, her breathing synced with his, long and deep, matching his rhythm until his body softened, his fists unclenched, and the screaming gave way to hiccuped gasps, then silence. For the first time in 40 minutes, the cabin was quiet. A collective exhale rippled through first class, but the silence wasn't relief, it was disbelief. A man whispered, "How did she do that?" while another muttered, "Took her 5 minutes." He couldn't manage an hour. Ethan stared at Maya, awe breaking through exhaustion, his lips parting like he wanted to speak but no words came out. Maya placed Noah back into his arms, their fingers brushing briefly, and for just a second, they shared something unspoken, a connection beyond roles, beyond rules, beyond the invisible walls of class and privilege. Then, from the back of the cabin, Vanessa's voice came like a cold wind, sharp and slicing through the fragile calm. Maya, she said tightly, we need to talk. Now. Maya turned slowly, still kneeling, her face unreadable, but in her chest, her heart pounded like turbulence slamming against metal, because she knew this wasn't over. This was only the beginning. The first-class cabin of Flight AA-392 sat in stunned silence, the weight of what had just happened pressing against the recycled air like an invisible force, and yet for Maya Jackson, standing there with trembling hands and the faint warmth of Noah's tiny body still lingering against her chest, the real storm was only beginning. She could feel Vanessa Reed's glare drilling into her back like heat through glass. A silent promise that this act of defiance would not go unpunished, but in this fragile moment, none of that mattered, because Noah was calm, his breathing soft and even, his eyelashes damp but finally resting against flushed cheeks, and Ethan Caldwell, the billionaire who minutes ago looked like a man unraveling, now stared at her as if seeing something he didn't know how to name. The other passengers kept stealing glances, some curious, some judgmental, others whispering half-formed thoughts about who she was and why she was here, but Maya ignored them, her focus locked on the little boy in Ethan's arms and the way his small hand curled unconsciously around his father's finger. How did you do that? Ethan asked finally, his voice low, almost reverent, as though speaking too loudly might break the spell. Maya hesitated, unsure if he expected a polished answer, but the truth slipped out before she could think. I've been calming babies since I was 17, she said softly. My little sister Aaliyah, she had asthma attacks in the middle of the night. If I panicked, she panicked. But if I stayed steady, so did she. That's all it is. Calm meeting calm. Ethan's brows lifted slightly, the corners of his mouth twitching in what could have been the ghost of a smile. You're telling me, he said slowly, his gaze fixed on his son, that what 100 parenting books and $5,000 worth of consultants couldn't teach me, you learned in Englewood? Maya's jaw tightened instinctively at the word, hearing the unspoken weight behind it, the subtle dismissal others often hid in their tone when referencing her neighborhood on Chicago's South Side, but his voice lacked mockery. Instead, there was curiosity there, something closer to awe than pity. She nodded once, keeping her expression neutral. Sometimes you can't buy what matters most, she murmured, and though the words were quiet, they landed with the kind of gravity that made Ethan look up sharply, their eyes meeting for a beat longer than either intended. That unspoken moment was shattered by the sound of Vanessa's heels slicing against the aisle, sharp, deliberate, a warning disguised as movement. "Maya," she said flatly, her smile brittle and professional as she leaned in close, her words a blade masked in honey. "Step into the galley with me. Now." Ethan's head turned instantly, his body shifting subtly as though to place himself between them. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his tone calm but layered with steel, the kind that made venture capitalists fold and boardrooms fall silent. Vanessa's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Of course not, Mr. Caldwell," she said smoothly, deliberately using his name loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear, reminding everyone of who he was and who she thought she needed to protect. "We just have protocols about boundaries." Maya exhaled slowly through her nose, nodding without protest, and followed Vanessa toward the galley, her step steady despite the pounding in her chest. The cramped space smelled of reheated coffee and plastic trays, its dim lighting a stark contrast to the ambient glow of first class, and as soon as the curtain fell shut behind them, Vanessa's professional mask dropped like glass hitting tile. "What part of stay in economy wasn't clear to you?" she hissed, her voice low but laced with venom. Maya kept her own voice measured, refusing to meet aggression with fire. "I heard a baby in distress," she said evenly. "I knew I could help. That's all I did." Vanessa's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Do you have any idea what you've risked? Do you know who that man is?" Her eyes glittered with something between irritation and envy. "If anything had gone wrong, if that baby so much as hiccuped wrong, it's my job on the line. Not yours. You're a temp, Maya. You're disposable." The word landed like a slap, but Maya didn't flinch, her silence a quiet act of defiance that made Vanessa's face tighten further. "You're not special," Vanessa added coldly, stepping closer until the edge of her clipboard brushed against Maya's arm. "You think one lullaby earns you his gratitude? These people aren't like us. Trust me, when this flight lands, you'll be back to pouring cheap coffee in economy while he forgets your name." Maya looked up slowly, her dark eyes steady, her voice soft but unyielding when she finally spoke. "I wasn't trying to impress him. I was helping a child. That's it." Vanessa blinked, momentarily thrown by the quiet strength in her tone, and for the first time, her composure cracked just enough to show the insecurity beneath her polished surface. But the moment passed as quickly as it came, and she straightened, icy professionalism snapping back into place. "Go back to your station," she said curtly, turning on her heel and vanishing into the aisle before Maya could respond. Left alone in the dim galley, Maya exhaled shakily, her mind racing, not with regret, but with something heavier, something she couldn't yet name. Back in first class, Ethan shifted Noah carefully against his shoulder, his gaze flicking to where Maya re-emerged from behind the curtain, her face calm, unreadable. Their eyes met briefly, and though neither spoke, the look they exchanged carried a weight no words could match, gratitude on one side, quiet resilience on the other. The rest of the cabin remained tense, passengers leaning into hushed conversations, some softening toward Maya, others glaring as though her very presence disrupted an invisible balance they'd paid to preserve. Ethan noticed it too, the way privilege hung in the air like turbulence you couldn't see but could feel pressing against your chest, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he hated it. He hated the whispers, the stares, the subtle hierarchy he had once benefited from without thinking, and as he glanced down at his now sleeping son, a thought took root quietly but firmly: this woman deserved better than contempt. Still, the tension between Maya and Vanessa didn't fade as the flight wore on. If anything, it thickened like clouds gathering before a storm. Every time Maya passed through the aisle, Vanessa's gaze tracked her like a hawk, sharp and calculating, and Maya, though composed, could sense the hostility curling around her like smoke. But if Vanessa thought fear would drive her back into silence, she miscalculated, because Maya had spent her whole life navigating invisible rules written by people who never wanted her to win, and she learned long ago that staying small was the quickest way to disappear. She would not disappear tonight. Somewhere over the Rockies, the cabin lights dimmed to a soft blue hush, the lull of quiet time settling over rows of reclined seats, but inside Maya's chest, her heart was still beating like drumfire, every sense sharpened by what she knew instinctively. Vanessa wasn't done, not by a long shot, and the next move would not be subtle. And she was right, though she couldn't know it yet, that somewhere in the shadows of this flight, the seeds of sabotage had already been planted, and the choice she made tonight would change everything when they landed. The soft blue cabin lights dimmed as Flight AA-392 settled into quiet time, but inside first class, tension still hung thick in the air, silent and heavy, like turbulence you couldn't see but could feel pressing against your chest. Noah slept peacefully now, his tiny breath soft against Ethan Caldwell's collar, yet the memory of his relentless cries lingered for everyone, a reminder of how fragile control could be even 38,000 feet in the air. Ethan sat back, adjusting his son carefully, but his gaze kept drifting toward Maya Jackson, the temporary attendant who had stepped forward when no one else dared, her calm composure still steady even under the weight of curious stares from passengers whispering behind their hands. A man in a tailored suit muttered, probably just trying to impress him, and a woman near the window replied softly, "He'll forget her name by morning," but Ethan's jaw tightened as he caught every word, his blue eyes cold and sharp. He didn't know Maya well, but he knew strength when he saw it, and in her, he saw something rare, someone who acted not for recognition but because she couldn't stand still while someone suffered. That thought humbled him more than he wanted to admit. As their eyes met briefly across the aisle, there was an unspoken exchange, gratitude from him, quiet resilience from her, but before either could look away, Vanessa Reed appeared, her polished heels silent on the carpet yet her presence cutting through the cabin like a cold draft. Her smile was professional, but her tone carried warning when she leaned in close to Ethan's seat. "Mr. Caldwell, just be mindful," she said smoothly. "Maya is inexperienced. If you need assistance, senior staff are better prepared." Ethan turned his head slowly, his voice calm but edged with steel. "She did what none of your senior staff could do," he replied softly. "I trust her." Vanessa's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she nodded and stepped away, but inside, resentment coiled tight, sharp and unyielding. In the galley, she pulled out her tablet and began drafting a report, her manicured nails tapping quickly, unauthorized handling of a VIP infant. Possible safety violation. Potential solicitation of payment. Each word carried deliberate weight, her intent hidden beneath the language of policy, a quiet act of sabotage designed to erase Maya without leaving fingerprints. Maya didn't know any of this yet. She moved down the aisle, checking on passengers, keeping her expression neutral, but when she passed Ethan's seat, his voice came low and steady. "How did you know what to do?" he asked softly, his tone stripped of arrogance, almost curious. She hesitated, then smiled faintly as she adjusted Noah's blanket. "I've been calming babies since I was 17, she said. "My little sister had asthma attacks. I learned to stay steady so she could too." Ethan's expression softened, something unspoken flickering behind his tired eyes. "That's not instinct," he said quietly. "That's strength." Her breath caught briefly at the unexpected acknowledgement, but before she could respond, Vanessa's voice sliced through the calm from the galley curtain. "Maya," she called sharply, though her smile remained fixed for the passengers watching. "A word, please." Maya followed her into the galley, the cramped space smelling faintly of reheated coffee, and Vanessa leaned close, her voice low and sharp beneath the hum of the engines. "I told you to stay in economy," she hissed, her clipboard clutched like a weapon. "Do you have any idea what you've risked? These passengers are high profile. We have standards." Maya's voice stayed calm, steady despite the sting in Vanessa's words. "I treated his son with care," she said simply. "That is the standard." Vanessa's eyes narrowed, her voice lowering further. "Don't confuse sentiment with policy," she whispered coldly. "People like Ethan Caldwell play by different rules. Don't think one lullaby earns you protection." Maya held her gaze without flinching, refusing to shrink beneath the threat, and after a long pause, Vanessa straightened abruptly, her composure snapping back into place. "Consider this your warning," she said curtly, disappearing behind the curtain. Alone in the quiet galley, Maya leaned briefly against the cold counter, inhaling deeply until her chest loosened, her mother's words echoing faintly in her mind, "Calm comes from your heart, not your hands." When she returned to first class, her expression was unreadable, but Ethan's eyes followed her, and though neither spoke, something in his gaze lingered, a promise unspoken but deeply felt. Across the cabin, Vanessa watched silently, her face perfectly smooth, but her tablet rested tucked beneath her arm, the complaint already sent, and in her mind, the next move was already taking shape. As Flight AA-392 began its slow descent into Seattle, the cabin lights brightened gently, and yet for Maya Jackson, the weight in her chest only grew heavier, because even though Noah slept peacefully in his father's arms and the worst of the chaos seemed behind them, she could still feel Vanessa's hostility clinging to her like static in the air, sharp and unseen but impossible to ignore. Maya adjusted her uniform, forcing her breathing to steady as she walked the aisle one last time, her movements graceful and controlled, but inside, her thoughts were tangled and restless, looping back to every whispered complaint she had overheard, every subtle glance that reminded her she didn't belong in first class, that she wasn't supposed to be seen at all, and yet, she had been seen, and by the one person who mattered most. Ethan Caldwell watched her approach quietly, his expression unreadable at first, but when she paused by his seat to collect a tray, he spoke low enough that only she could hear, his voice steady but warmer than it had been all night. "When we land," he said softly, glancing briefly at Noah as he stirred faintly, "I'd like to speak with you. Privately." The words caught her off guard, but before she could respond, a nearby passenger leaned forward, curiosity piqued, and Maya straightened quickly, giving a polite nod before retreating toward the galley. Her mind raced with possibilities she couldn't allow herself to believe. She'd seen this before, promises made midair, words spoken in the heat of crisis that dissolved the moment wheels touched the ground, but something in Ethan's tone, the deliberate weight behind it, made her heart pound harder than she wanted to admit. As the landing gear locked into place, Vanessa appeared at the front of the cabin, her voice clipped and professional as she delivered the final arrival announcement, but when her eyes passed over Maya, there was the faintest curve of satisfaction in her smile, a quiet reminder that this wasn't over. The moment the plane touched down, chaos returned in a rush of unbuckled seatbelts and vibrating phones, but Ethan waited, holding Noah close as the cabin emptied slowly around them. Maya lingered near the galley, ready to slip away unnoticed, when Ethan stepped into the aisle, balancing Noah effortlessly on his shoulder. "Walk with me," he said simply, his voice quiet but commanding in a way that left no room for hesitation. She hesitated only briefly before falling into step beside him, keeping a respectful distance as they moved past rows of passengers stealing quick, speculative glances. In the jet bridge, away from the murmurs and polished cabin, Ethan stopped and shifted Noah carefully into his other arm before turning to face her fully. "You changed everything tonight," he said plainly, his blue eyes clear but softened by exhaustion and something else she couldn't quite name. "I came onto this flight thinking I had every answer, but you showed me what I couldn't see." Maya frowned slightly, unsure how to respond, but before she could, he continued, his words careful but deliberate. "I'm funding a network of trauma-informed childcare centers," he explained. "We're opening a new branch in Tacoma next month. I want you to lead it." Her breath caught, her mind stumbling over the offer as though she hadn't heard him right. "Lead it," she repeated softly, disbelief lacing her voice. Ethan nodded once, his gaze steady. $85,000 a year, full benefits, and I'll personally cover your tuition to finish your degree in child psychology." For a moment, the sounds of the terminal seemed to fade into silence, leaving only the echo of his words ringing in her ears. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust this man who had shown her a kindness she rarely saw from people like him, but doubts clawed at the edges of her thoughts, the memory of broken promises, the reminder of Vanessa's warnings, the reality of who she was and where she came from. "Why me?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan glanced down at Noah, then back at her, his expression unwavering. "Because you saw what I couldn't," he said simply. "Because you understood him better than I did." The honesty in his voice struck something deep inside her, unraveling defenses she didn't know she still carried, but before she could find the words to respond, her phone buzzed sharply in her pocket. She glanced down, expecting a message from her sister, but her stomach dropped when she read the subject line lighting up her screen: "Immediate HR review, contract under investigation." Her chest tightened, the air suddenly feeling heavier, and when she opened the notification, her breath caught at the formal, clipped language: "Following reports of policy violations during Flight AA392, please report to HR upon arrival. Your temporary contract is under review." Vanessa's complaint. Maya swallowed hard, fighting to steady her breathing as her mind replayed every subtle threat, every warning laced in Vanessa's perfectly polished tone, and the weight of it pressed down on her like turbulence slamming against the cabin. Ethan noticed instantly, his sharp instincts catching the flicker of panic she couldn't hide, and his voice dropped low as he stepped closer. "What is it?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, torn between pride and fear, before finally showing him the screen. His expression darkened as he scanned the message, his jaw tightening, his free hand curling into a fist he didn't bother to hide. "Vanessa," he muttered under his breath, the name sharp and cold, and when his gaze lifted back to hers, there was no hesitation in it, only resolve. "This isn't happening," he said firmly. "Not on my watch." Maya shook her head slightly, her voice low and tight as she fought against the sting in her throat. "Ethan, I can't fight her," she whispered. "I'm a temp. One complaint, and I'm gone." He shifted Noah carefully into the crook of his arm, freeing his hand to press lightly against the strap of his leather briefcase, his voice dropping even lower, quiet but edged with power. "Then I'll fight her," he said simply. "I'll speak to the airline's CEO myself if I have to." Maya blinked at him, startled by the calm certainty in his tone, but she said nothing, afraid to let hope bloom where it had so often been crushed before. Together, they walked the polished corridor toward the terminal, silent except for the soft coos of a waking Noah, but the air between them was charged, the weight of unspoken questions and choices pressing in from every side. As they neared the arrivals hall, Vanessa appeared at the far end of the walkway, clipboard in hand, her stride confident, the faintest smile playing on her lips as her gaze swept over them like a quiet claim of victory. Maya slowed instinctively, her stomach twisting, but Ethan's pace didn't falter, his expression hardened, his blue eyes locked on Vanessa with quiet intensity, and though he said nothing, the promise in his stride was unmistakable. Vanessa stopped just inside the gate, lifting her chin slightly, her voice smooth and deliberate when she finally spoke. "HR is expecting you, Maya," she said softly, but loud enough for nearby crew to hear, as though cementing the weight of authority in the moment. Maya inhaled slowly, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag, every instinct screaming at her to retreat, but Ethan shifted Noah slightly and stepped forward, placing himself subtly between them, his voice quiet but sharp when he finally answered. "No," he said simply, his tone calm but carrying a force that made Vanessa blink in surprise. "We'll handle this my way." And in that suspended moment, standing beneath the sterile glow of the terminal lights with passengers flowing endlessly around them, something unspoken passed between all three of them, a battle line drawn without words, a confrontation inevitable, and as Vanessa's smile faltered for the first time that night, Maya realized with a jolt of clarity that whatever happened next would change everything, not just for her, but for Ethan, for Noah, and for the life she had barely begun to imagine. 1 month later, the scent of lavender filled the halls of the Tacoma Child Development Center, sunlight spilling across bright murals as Maya Jackson stood near the doorway in a crisp blazer, her name engraved on the polished plaque, Program Director. It still felt unreal. She remembered that night in Seattle, standing under the harsh terminal lights, Vanessa's sharp voice ordering her to report to HR, fear twisting in her stomach as she walked into the glass-walled office. The HR manager spoke of policy violations and safety concerns, but before Maya could defend herself, the door opened and Ethan Caldwell stepped in, Noah resting on his shoulder, quiet authority in his voice. "This review ends now," he said, placing a signed letter from the airline's CEO on the desk, clearing Maya of all wrongdoing and praising her actions as exceptional care under extraordinary circumstances. Vanessa's complaint was withdrawn, and within a week, she was reassigned to short-haul commuter flights, a quiet but undeniable demotion. Now, here she was, leading a team of specialists, helping children who needed care the most. Ethan kept every promise: a salary, full tuition for her psychology degree, and the chance to build something meaningful. Her sister Aaliyah had moved to Tacoma, starting college nearby, their bond stronger than ever. Sometimes, Maya still couldn't believe it, how a single night 38,000 feet above the ground had changed everything. Ethan visited the center often with Noah, and when she saw the little boy's giggle as he reached for her, she felt the same warmth she'd felt that night on the plane. "He remembers you," Ethan would say softly, and she'd smile, brushing Noah's tiny hand with her fingers, grateful for the bond they shared. But the impact went beyond her. Ethan quietly funded 4 more centers across Washington, each focused on trauma-informed care, and worked with the airline to implement mandatory anti-bias training for all crew. Vanessa's complaint became a case study, not of misconduct, but of systemic prejudice, changing company policy from the inside. Maya never asked for recognition, but she knew the ripples of her actions had reached farther than she ever imagined. That afternoon, after finishing a meeting, Maya paused by her office window, watching parents pick up their children, tiny hands slipping into bigger ones, laughter spilling into the fading light. She thought back to that flight, the cries, the stares, the fear of losing her job, and realized every hardship had led her here. Ethan knocked gently on her doorframe, Noah asleep in his arms, and smiled. "The board just approved Portland," he said casually. "That makes 5 centers." She turned toward him, shaking her head softly, still amazed. "5, she whispered. "I never thought," Ethan interrupted gently, his voice steady. "I did," he said simply, and for the first time, she believed him. Maya looked down at Noah, peaceful and safe, then back at the colorful room filled with children's laughter, and she felt something she hadn't in years: belonging. She understood now what her mother used to tell her late at night: calm comes from your heart, not your hands. She smiled faintly, her voice quiet but certain. "I used to think I was invisible," she admitted softly. Ethan met her gaze, his reply steady and sure. "You were never invisible," he said. "You just needed the right place to stand." And for the first time, Maya knew she had found it. Thank you for watching this emotional story. If it touched your heart, please give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our next stories. And tell us where you're watching from in the comments, we'd love to hear from you. Your support means the world to us.